Sir, the Kingdom army was also decimated, and His Highness Dimitri has been counted among the dead.
What?
It has been a lifetime, hasn't it, Professor? Yes, I thought so too.
So this is pretty confusing. First the game tells you he's dead, and then 1 minute later his ghost shows up and starts talking to us? Is Dimitri really dead or alive in Silver Snow? This is what we will be investigating today. Now, when I first played Silver Snow, I thought, as many people have, oh, well the game said he's dead and then he shows up and tells us he's alive, but we're actually just dreaming or hallucinating. When we look at it closer, however, it's not so simple. Looking at the other routes, the only one Dimitri definitely survives in is Azure Moon, his own route. Not really a great track record for him. However, his fate does seem a bit altered in both routes. We know he ends up dying. In Crimson Flower, Edelgard ends up finishing him off after a brutal struggle at the Tailtean Plains. Verdant Wind, by contrast, he just dies off screen after the blood at Gronder. The game really does him dirty by just having Hildur tell us, oh well, he died, oh well. However, what is odd here is that, for those who have played both Verdant Wind and Silver Snow, they're almost identical, and yet this scene is only in Silver Snow. It's not in Verdant Wind. And here's the craziest part. Silver Snow was made first, so they could just reuse this cutscene. It wouldn't take them that much, I would imagine, to just put this scene in Verdant Wind too. Just replace Sedith afterwards with Claude, and easy, you know, they do it the whole game, where they swap out lords and cutscenes, and they swap out their lines and stuff like that. But weirdly enough here, that's not the case, and it's really strange they did that. However, this happens right at the same time in Silver Snow that Hilda would have told you he died, roughly. In Verdant Wind, you do participate in the blood at Gronder, however you miss the action in Silver Snow. When Byleth partakes in the second battle at Gronder, whoever Byleth leads, wins. Without Byleth, it's just a bloodbath for each side. There seems to be not even a Pyrrhic victory for either of the three powers. Claude is missing in action, Dimitri is presumed dead, and Edelgard, while still present, has sustained pretty severe injuries and has lost her favorable position. With this info, it's clear that the battle ended up going drastically differently. Obviously, we're just going off Sedith's scout's word, but given the sound of it, it sounds like it's more chaotic than usual, and yet extremely indecisive. I do not doubt that some of the cast does indeed fall at Gronder. It would appear most, if not all, of the Kingdom forces were absolutely slaughtered, with it being stated by Dimitri himself that Dedue, Gilbert, and Rodrigue all fell in the battle. Unfortunately, with the other two, it's hard to say. Claude survives by default in every route, except having the option to die in Crimson Flower, but even that tends to be the option no one really picks. So we can assume he just flies off like a coward and left to grab the milk in Almyra. We cannot at all say for the remaining Leicester forces, however. At least the ones that we haven't yet to encounter. Such as, I don't know, Hilda. What happens to her? Who knows? Assuming they weren't recruited by Byleth, we can assume that most participated in the battle, but who knows what happens to them. Likewise, it's even harder to gauge the Empire's casualty, as in Silver Snow, everyone besides Edelgard and Hubert stays to fight with the Church. So we're not going to hear about any noteworthy characters actually dying, because they're all on our side. And seeing as how you fight both later at Embar, it's obvious they do survive the battle. Focusing back on the Kingdom, even right as you secure the Bridge of Myrden right before this battle happens off-screen, you briefly meet with Gilbert, who says he's joined back to serving Fargus, and even drops a death flag saying that him and the forces will fight the Empire, knowing full and well that it might just be their funeral. The only characters we know who fought at Gronder are Edelgard, Dimitri, Claude, Rodrigue, Gilbert, and Dedue. Of those, we can only confirm Edelgard and later on Dedue to be clearly among the living. We'll discuss Dedue's role later, though. The rest we never see again and only assume to be dead. According to Dimitri, he once again seems to be the sole survivor, at least of him and his allies, after surviving the tragedy of Duscur as a child. Given the way Dimitri talks, I somewhat doubt this is actually just Byleth imagining things. Dimitri even agrees with Byleth's surprise that he is in fact alive. Dimitri finds himself regretful that yet again so many close to him fell in battle, this time under his direct command. And Byleth even has the option to say, there must be a reason you survived. By this point, even Byleth is pretty sold that Dimitri is actually alive and talking to him. even if Dmitri seems to express extreme guilt for it. However, there's some major questions that need explaining first. For one, why the whole fainting thing? If it weren't for that, it'd be extremely clear Dmitri's alive. Secondly, at the end of this interaction, Dmitri wants to tell Byleth his plans, but we don't ever really find out what those plans entail. Byleth going and waking up to Dmitri disappearing instead of saying no one's there doesn't inherently mean Dmitri wasn't there. We don't really know how much time has transpired or what exactly happened. I do have some theories as to what might have happened though. For one, I think finding someone you thought to be dead being alive might shock you into fainting or something. People have fainted from shock before, so I don't see it being entirely implausible for this to be the cause of it. You can even see in the cutscenes, Byleth is very visibly shocked at hearing from the guard that he's dead, and once again, whenever he sees Dmitri, he just thought he was dead, and now he sees the guy himself in the flesh. I speculate it's also possible what Dmitri told Byleth could have also caused it. Seth does think at first you were just dreaming, but he does suggest it's possible you weren't in fact dreaming, but only he was meant to see or hear said person. Okay, but then why would Dmitri go into hiding? Why not join Byleth? They have a common enemy. Well, he does state he has no means to reclaim his rightful territory or continue his push to Embar. Consider this possibility. Dmitri lived, but no one besides you know this. Consider he has no means to fight the Empire, but now he has pretty much no protection from them either. All his allies are dead, but they also aren't really searching for him now. The Empire isn't anyway. They think he's dead. If everyone thinks he's dead, his enemies aren't going to be looking for him. This could actually benefit him. His enemies aren't hunting him anymore and don't expect a threat from him. Which leads me to the next question. It should also be considered that in a war, there's likely spies, and Edelgard, while having lost the monastery, may still have some spies in the area. Or at least Dmitri suspects as much. I think he's going to use that cover of the enemies thinking he's dead to switch plans to something more covert to get his revenge. This leads me into what Dmitri is going to reveal his plans. I suspect Dmitri switched strategies to assassination. He's realized that running around like a brute and a headless chicken isn't going to do him much good. And he really has to be careful now because he has very few people even working with him now. He couldn't win battles, but he could still try to eliminate key targets. It does seem odd for Dmitri to do something this calculated, but then again, no other version of Dmitri is as beaten as this one. Since the other ones don't really survive, and Azure Moon Dmitri grows into a better man. He does seem more aware and to his senses than Verdant Wind Dmitri does. I think losing Gronder and once again being the only survivor ended waking him up. This can be further explained with Dedue. Dedue is both something that solves the mystery and opens up another. Even Dmitri says Dedue fell at Gronder, so when Byleth sees him, it's also a big shock he's waiting to storm Embar Palace. It's certainly possible Dmitri never saw Dedue again, and the men were separated, thus making them think the other is dead. From what little interaction we have with Dedue, it's unclear as to whether or not he even believes Dmitri to be alive. He says he was ordered to bring him Edelgard's head, which is something that would actually happen in history, where kings would say, go bring me my enemy's head. That would prove that their enemy is dead. Obviously, if their head is detached from the rest of their body, they're not going to be alive. However, with Dedue's wording, it's unclear if these are old orders from before or after Gronder. I mean, they could be from before, and he's just continuing to follow them like a good soldier, because we know he is a good soldier to Dmitri. Or did they actually meet afterwards, and Dmitri told him directly to strike her down, just in more covert ways? It does seem out of character for Dmitri to send off Dedue to do his dirty work, but then again, Dedue could just be following his old command to the letter, or he switched to more subtle ways. It's clear no one expects Dedue to be alive, just as Dmitri. The question is, do either of them know of the other's fate? We can't really say. The last we see of Dmitri, he believes Dedue has been lost at Gronder. To be fair, Dedue says almost the exact same thing in Verdant Wind that he does in Silver Snow, where Dmitri is confirmed dead, and we just never see him after the fact. This makes all the less clear. I think it's safe to say that, given that info, Dedue would see his liege's command through, even in death. But this brings me to my next final theory. Dmitri survived Gronder, but by the time you capture Embar, he's no longer alive. There's a plethora of possibilities, and we'd be here all day discussing them all. One possibility is Dmitri pretty much returns to his old ways, like at the beginning of Azure Moon, and he just goes about, taking out Imperial camps on his own. He just bites off more than he can chew, and eventually he's taken down. Nothing really special happens, just he just gets overwhelmed eventually. He just dies of attrition. I'm not entirely too sure, but the point is, in this one, he takes down as many of them as he can, really. However, I feel like this is not as likely, as he seems to have no more motivation to fight. Earlier, Dimitri was driven by revenge and absolutely bent on killing Edelgard. How feasible this actually was with what he had, probably not very. But Dimitri did seem to be driven regardless. The thing is, when we see him after Gronder, he seems most comparable to a state in Azure Moon about this time of the story. But obviously things go much better for him there, and he's in a much better place, surrounded by friends and allies. We never actually see what Dimitri does upon reaching this point without Byleth. Sure, he could just live the rest of his life in some little village under an alias, but again, I really doubt Dimitri the type to do that. I feel like he's more likely to do something highly drastic and extreme. However, Dimitri does hint at the hopelessness of his situation. I do wonder if at the rate he was going to off himself. I thought it's kind of weird people theorize this about Marianne when Silver Snow Dimitri is even more broken. It would also explain why the game cuts out that info, because I don't really think Nintendo would want to confirm a guy offing himself. As I said before, we could go on for days of the possibilities of what happened and when, but to sum things up, I believe Dimitri is indeed alive in the scene after Gronder lamenting how he didn't join his fallen comrades. We know he possesses no chance of beating back the Empire or taking his own kingdom. Dedue is possibly ordered after Gronder to finish the job, though I suspect he's just following old orders since he does this regardless of whether Dimitri dies at Gronder. If my Dimitri switches gears theory is correct though, Dimitri could just be trying to assist you in the way he can to help you beat Edelgard, which is admittedly very, very little, but you have to remember, he doesn't have much to work with at this point. If you wonder why he doesn't join you at the siege of Empire Palace, it's because he's probably dead by then. Whatever the case, it's very clear that the writers wanted this to be ambiguous, since even with Dedue, it's just really hard to say what's actually going on here. And the way this is written, it seems too deliberate to be an accident. Like, Dedue, they could have slipped up with and been like, they could have given you some sort of hint whether Dimitri is confirmed alive or not, but they don't. They actually make it very clear that we don't really know. Honestly, as much as I enjoyed brainstorming this video, it was pretty difficult to work with. However, I am interested to see what you guys think. Do my theories seem feasible? Perhaps you have an idea I never came up with. In any case, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.